Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I am so excited to be here again to record episode 15 of Reading Michael Jackson. This feels like quite a feat to me, if I'm being honest. I'm enjoying the process so much of creating this podcast, of releasing it into the world. And I have to say, it's been out now about 5 weeks. And while it is still a very small podcast, I'm happy to know I have a strong base of some really dedicated listeners that I've gotten to know a little bit, but also that I get to see are from all places in the world. I think I read 50% of the listeners are in the US, which is where I am, and the rest of you are somewhere else in the world, which is incredibly cool to me. So I'm thrilled that you're finding the time in your very busy lives to dedicate to listening to this podcast and to spending some time with Michael's work in this way. It's been a true pleasure to me to do this. I'm already thinking about ideas for season 2. So I'm getting ahead of myself, of course, but needless to say, it's just been a really good time. So with that said, I don't want to linger on the intro. I'd like to get right into the piece this week. And this week we have a continuation, of course, of Dancing the Dream. And this is one of the first pieces that is especially personal. Now, of course, there's personal components in everything Michael has written so far. But in this case, this is a piece specifically dedicated to his mother. So let's get into it. This is Michael's beautiful poem dedicated to Katherine Jackson, and it is called Mother. Mother. Eons of time I've been gestating, to take a form been hesitating. From the unmanifest this cosmic conception, on this earth a fantastic reception. And then one fateful August morn, from your being I was born. With tender love you nurtured a seed, to your own distress you paid no heed. Unmindful of any risk and danger, you decided upon this lonely stranger. Rainbows, clouds, the deep blue sky, glittering birds that fly on high. Out of fragments you've made my whole. From the elements you fashioned my soul. Mother dear, you gave me life. Because of you, no struggle or strife. You gave me joy and position, cared for me without condition. And if I ever change this world, it's from the emotions you've unfurled. Your compassion is so sweet and dear. Your finest feelings I can hear. I can sense your faintest notion, the wondrous magic of your love potion. And now that I have come so far, met with every king and czar, encountered every color and creed, of every passion, every greed, I go back to that starry night with not a fear for muscle or might. You taught me how to stand and fight for every single wrong and right. Every day without a hold, I will treasure what you've molded. I will remember every kiss. Your sweet words I'll never miss. No matter where I go from here, you're in my heart, my mother dear. I can only imagine how any mother would be incredibly touched to have their son or child write a poem like this, dedicated to them. Katherine was a blessed woman in the sense that she had a beautiful family and a beautiful son in Michael, who loved and adored her to no end. I'm sure many of us as fans have heard Michael talk about his mother. He describes her as perfection. He almost sees no faults in her. And that's understandable, because not only were they very close emotionally, but it makes sense when you understand Michael's life. A life in which love, in a lot of ways, was conditional. I can only imagine how challenging it is as a human being to find and locate love to begin with. But when you're a person who so much love you receive is on the condition of what you give and how you literally and figuratively perform, I would imagine it would feel especially difficult to find love that felt unconditional. His mother, we could assume, was one of the few people in his life who would have allowed space for him to not perform, who likely did not see him as a performer first, or see him for his magnetism as a performer or artist, who saw him as her child before anything else. I've never heard stories about Katherine Jackson being especially consumed with Michael's career or the career of the Jackson 5. It's possible, of course. She obviously supported it in her own way, but I don't get the sense from Katherine that she needed that from her children. I think she seemed to want success for them, obviously, safety, love, all the things a mother would want. But I've never gotten the impression that Michael's ability to perform had anything to do with her being pleased with him or loving him. And I say all of that because, of course, the flip side of his relationship with his mother is his relationship with his father, which we all know was challenging. It was challenging. In whatever terms Michael came to that in his life, especially as he grew older and forgave his father for things he endured as a child, it's evident that he didn't feel that unconditional love from his father. So it is likely that his mother then became the sole source of love, and unconditional love specifically, in his life, and therefore one of the safest people he had. Now, looking at the actual poem, I think what's interesting about this is it's of course about his mother, his physical mother, the being that gave physical birth to him. But in line with so many of the pieces that we have read already from Dancing the Dream, there's this continuation of a spiritual kind of birth we're talking about. Starting at the very beginning of the piece, eons of time I've been gestating, to take a form been hesitating, from the unmanifest this cosmic conception, on this earth a fantastic reception. It makes me actually feel quite emotional to think about him writing in this way. Now, of course, if you're still a listener of this podcast, at this point, you know I love the spiritual stuff. And though my beliefs are not, fundamental to understanding Michael's work, this is my interpretation. And when I think about the way he described his life and his work, the way he clearly saw himself and others as spiritual beings in human form, I think about the intentionality of arriving when he did. of intentionally timing his arrival in human form for this earth. Eons of time I've been gestating to take a form, been hesitating. Whoever Michael is, the spirit that is Michael Jackson, that spirit and soul taking time to enter this landscape, to come to this earth and begin his journey through life with the intentionality of reaching the world. On this earth, a fantastic reception. From quite literally the moment this man was born, he was being received with gratitude and excitement and joy. You can't help but believe in the concept of destiny when you think about that. And you think about the phrasing of this opening where he says this very clearly was intentional on a spiritual level to arrive when he did. And then one fateful August morn from your being I was born, unmindful of any risk and danger, you decided upon this lonely stranger. This lonely stranger. What's so interesting about that line is the way I interpret that is he's referring to himself as the lonely stranger. And it makes me think about how we end up with the families that we end up with. I think most of us have a tendency to think about, our families as the people who create us. And that's likely true in a lot of ways. But this line, you decided upon this lonely stranger. This line intrigues me because he's referring to himself in this way. I mean, the idea that we're all strangers to one another, but then you can give birth to a total stranger, and then they are a part of you and they become, this closeness to you. They become a branch off of you in some way. There's something beautiful about that. But spiritually, are we strangers? Are we coming from the same energy? Are we coming from the same place? Do we know each other before we arrive? Just again, spiritually, it's just an interesting choice of phrasing on his part. He goes on to say, out of fragments you've made me whole. From the elements you fashioned my soul. So it makes me think about how when Michael talked about his own creative energy, when he talked about the work he created, the writing, the music, he referred to it as something that came from God. He was chosen to deliver that. The way he writes about Katherine here, his mother, out of fragments you've made my whole, from the elements you fashioned my soul. I almost feel like she was kind of the vessel through which God sent him through her. And I almost see that relation, the way he interpreted his own creativity to the way he understood her being his mother. She was the chosen one to be his mother. And she used what she had at her disposal. She honed and crafted to help create him, just as Michael does his own music. And then she released him into the world to do what he was meant to do. Much like any artist releases their work into the world and watches it manifest and take hold and affect people, or not, frankly. In the case of Michael, he goes on to say, if I ever change this world, it's from the emotions you've unfurled. That's huge already, to credit her so fundamentally with his impact. I do find it funny to say that Michael Jackson, of all people, uses the word if to say, if I ever change this world. Okay, Michael, you clearly have. But obviously, what does he mean by change the world? Does he mean have millions of people fall in love with him musically, become huge fans of him? Does he mean that kind of impact? Probably not. I think Michael clearly recognized and valued his legacy as a musical artist and what he was contributing, especially for Black artists and Black people, and the culture that embraced him and the impact that made, I'm sure he thought of that as changing the world. But based on interviews with him, based on what it seemed to be that he valued most in life, which was making the world a better, more just and humane place, I would say he probably had a different measure for changing the world than you or I might. I think it's very clear he changed the world. I mean, he could have said, however I change this world, but he said, if ever I change this world. And that word choice is meaningful, right? The however I do is a guarantee. The if is a little uncertainty. Perhaps it's the humility in Michael. I don't know. But he credits her for that. And I think that's beautiful. Toward the end, he writes, "And now that I have come so far, met with every king and czar, I go back to that starry night with not a fear for muscle or might." And I think what he's doing there is reflecting on his spirit's choice, his soul's choice to arrive when it did. And he's saying, now that I've been through all of this, now that I've seen so much and learned so much and experienced it all, this was the right time. This was the right choice. There was nothing to fear because his mother equipped him. He was equipped to handle the challenges he was given throughout his life because he was set up that way. He was built that way through the work of his mother in this case. And again, what a beautiful reflection to be able to look back at your own life, at all the things you endured, both good and bad, and to be able to say, because of this person, I was able to endure all of it. I am here and I'm strong and I am glad. That's a beautiful gift to be able to give someone. I think the ending is really sweet and very interesting. He says, "I will treasure what you've molded. I will remember every kiss. Your sweet words I'll never miss. No matter where I go from here, you're in my heart, mother dear." I think the line, "your sweet words I'll never miss," is very interesting because people typically say they will miss or they do miss those they love. But I just read that as him reinforcing that everything she taught him is embedded within him and it is a part of him that travels with him everywhere he goes. And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful sentiment. And the poem is capped off with a beautiful photo of Katherine Jackson to the right of it. Katherine was, of course, a beautiful lady. And I remember reading once that when the Jacksons, The American Dream miniseries came out in the 90s, Michael's primary comment was that someone beautiful had to play his mother, which I think is sweet. And I think he would be happy with the result with Angela Bassett. And I think he'd be happy with Nia Long for the upcoming biopic, both beautiful women. But he revered his mother. And when I think about his relationship to his mother, I also think about the fact that it was a relationship, from what I understand, of a kind of lacking. Not in the moments with her, but in her absence in his life. He spent so much time as a young child on the road, touring in different cities, performing away from her. I mean, when they moved from Gary, Indiana to California, he had a huge span of time without her. The longing for that maternal figure, I think we've seen him in some places, I think, latch on to different women in his life. I mean, I think immediately of Rose Fine, who was his teacher and tutor growing up when he was on the road. There's many videos of them when he was a child, actually, and it's fascinating to watch his little interactions and his curiosity when she would ask questions. There's, strangely, on YouTube, there's a video of Rose Fine with all of the Jackson brothers and Michael. Michael's very young. and she's giving a history lesson of some kind. And Michael's so engaged and asking all these questions. And let me just tell you, as a teacher, it would be wonderful to have very engaged students like this. It doesn't always happen, but it's really sweet. And then as he gets older, when the Gardner Street Elementary School does the dedication to him, I think he was like 29 because it was the late 80s. The Gardner Street Elementary School in Los Angeles dedicated an auditorium to him, calling it the Michael Jackson Auditorium, because that is where he attended school when they lived in LA. And his teacher, Rose Fine, was there for the event. And I think about that as well, and how I get the impression that Michael was the kind of person who, if someone had an impact on his life, he made it very clear. He honored them. He made them aware of their impact and how important they were, because he was a person who always looked back and honored the past and honored what came before him, while also looking to the future. And that's a beautiful balance to strike, I think. Beyond this photo, I want to talk about one other piece. So after the mother poem and then the photo of Katherine, if you flip to the next page, there are these beautiful photos of Michael. It's a 2-page spread of a photo in which Michael is leaning against a mirror. His back is leaning against the mirror. And so we can see this reflective portrait of his back at the same time as we can see him. So it's like getting 2 shots of him. Firstly, can we just talk about how incredibly symmetrical your appearance has to be to look good in both a reflection and a regular photograph? Because I could not pull this off, Michael. But I wanted to talk about this a little bit because this was a photo taken in one of my favorite photo sessions ever of Michael Jackson. And it was a photo taken by the incredible Dilip Mehta. And these photos are absolutely stunning photos. They are artistic, they're transcendent. The beauty of them is incredible. And not just because I think Michael's beautiful, but because the actual composition of the photos, the lighting, the nature of what he's doing in the photos, they're incredibly natural. They're not emphasizing his iconography or his status as a superstar. They're incredibly human photos. They're deep and dark and emotional and also just breathtaking. And if you have not looked at these photos altogether, I strongly encourage you to. The photographer, Dilip Mehta, is credited in the back of the book. If you don't have the book, though, I really encourage you to Google it, to search for these photos together. There's plenty of places, different fan sites and whatnot, that have compiled them into one place. They're just incredible. And this particular photo is insanely stunning to me. Michael looks to me almost like a painting. I mean, his eyes, his skin, his hair, the hat he's wearing, the facial expression. There's something, I mean, it feels just like this incredible portrait, which is not how I would feel about most photos of a person. I mean, yes, technically they could be a portrait, but this actually feels like one. Every time I look at it, it looks like a work of art to me, personally. It doesn't look like a photograph of Michael Jackson, but a work of art representing Michael Jackson. But of course, Michael is a part of why these are such amazing photos. If you're not familiar with the various photographers that worked with Michael throughout his career, you're more normal than I am. But one of his primary photographers, named Harrison Funk, I think he was quoted as saying that Michael had the most beautiful eyes he had ever photographed. And I don't know how that could not be true when I look at this photo, as well as so many others of him. He had incredibly expressive eyes that signal something that I struggle to articulate, because Of course, I read a lot of spirituality into Michael's work, especially in this book, but in general. I read a lot of spirituality into Michael's aura and the reason he had the impact on the world that he did. I don't just see him as a regular person who happened to get famous. I mean, I really see him as someone exceptional and incredibly special, and that boils down even to his eyes, and his ability to connect with people through his eyes and through his gaze. And I think that's something that implicitly did help people connect to him, maybe who didn't even realize it. And I'm not saying everyone would look at Michael and feel that connection because of his eyes, but I do think there's something special happening there. Obviously, everyone knows the phrase that eyes are windows to the soul. I feel that's more true for some than others. And in the case of Michael, I think it's incredibly true. And it seemed to be something that even he personally felt and thought, which could be part of why he wore sunglasses a lot, for a little bit of self-protection. In fact, I know that's why. I've heard him say it, but that's a whole separate topic. I don't want to derail further from the poem Mother. I really just wanted to spend a little time talking about the photography because it's stunning and it's part of the message of what Michael's sending here. Obviously, there's photos throughout the book that are from, famous performances and things, but this specific set of photos, I believe, was taken specifically for Dancing the Dream. I could be wrong about that. I should probably fact check, but I believe it was. And so that also means this was part of the total message and experience he was trying to deliver to us. It's not just the poetry. It's not just the beautiful sentiments about his mother and her beautiful photograph. It's everything before and after that as well. So with that said, I am going to wrap up today's episode. I really enjoyed looking at the more personal side of Michael with his mother, as well as talking about the photography. And I look forward to continuing this with you next week. So please join me then and have a wonderful week, and we'll talk soon.